everyone. Welcome to our meetup for today. This is our third meetup for January. It's great to have you all here. Nicola and I are going to be unpacking the shift from consumer to client and the process of clientization, which Jay spoke about last year when we had a kind of our partner dinners. And this is a topic that we want to continue talking about this year. So Nicola and I are going to be presenting. The session is being recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. So please look out when we post the link. And yeah, with that said, I'm going to hand over to Nicola.
Cool. I think a good starting point for this would be to define what the difference is between a consumer versus a customer versus a client. The consumer is the person who consumes or uses a product, and they aren't necessarily the person that buys a product. Generally, the business has little to no knowledge about who their consumers are. They kind of put their products out there, they get bought, they don't get bought. The only information that a business really gets is whether sales were made or not. If a consumer has an issue with a suggestion, they can maybe phone apply something and make a complaint, but there's very little connection between the business and consumer. More importantly, the consumer has very little power in terms of reshaping the product. Jay kind of always uses the example that you can't choose what color your toothpaste is. You just get the toothpaste and you have to accept that it's white or black. So customers, these are the people who purchase your product, and the business will know a little bit more about the person. So they might know their name, their surname, address, and what different products they use or purchase. A retail bank would be a good example of this, where a person opens a bank and they give you a certain amount of information, and then that's stored in a CRM or database somewhere. So then in this kind of level, the customer also doesn't really have much power in terms of shaping the core offering of the business, but the bank can maybe use some of the information to engage in some personalization practices, but I'll get into that more later. And then the client relationship is when the buyer and seller collaborate to shape the product to meet the buyer's needs. So at this level, the business doesn't just know your name, they also know what your greatest pains are, what your ideas of success are at quite an intimate level. And they're continuously engaging with one another. The value of the product is co-created at this level. This to demonstrate what happens when you automate engagement and which kinds of automation reinforce which relationships. The consumer level, the model that you're using to automate engagement are trained on generic archetypes, and your models learn in batches. They're using static data to make predictions about how best to engage. Personalization at this level is limited to customization. A classic example of customization is if you log into Instagram and then Instagram tells you, oh, what kind of content are you interested in? And you select a few categories, and then it will kind of filter the content accordingly, but the core offering of the product doesn't change at all. And we say that at this level, all the business knows that is true of you is also true of society, which is why it says society there at the bottom. So the consumer is, in essence, like kind of a representative of the idea of a generic human in society. So then moving on to the customer level, if you're automating engagement for customers, your models would be trained on archetypal segments. So you're taking a smaller group of people, like based on demographics or geographical location, and you're making assumptions about what an individual might want based on what the group that they're part of wants. And you can already see why this is flawed, because every individual is different and what they want doesn't necessarily resonate with other people in their group. The customer kind of takes on the identity of the collective, and any signal that the business receives comes in the form of, say, a decrease or increase in sales or a decrease and increase in engagement. But these stats say very little about what the business should do to change things and pivot in a way that's kind of informed by a shot in the dark. It's an assumption. And the thing that creates value here is personalization, but these are still just predictions based on what an individual is most likely to respond to based on the persona that they've been ascribed to. Doesn't really have any grounding in evidence from individual behavior. Moving on to the client level, and you can think of this as a model per customer approach. Here you have a model that's learning dynamically from customer behavior in real time. Dynamic model continuously adjusts parameters based on a real-time input. So they adjust the messaging or the frequency of messaging based on how the user is responding. The way that the business presents itself or its product to the buyer is informed by the real-time evidence. So in that way, the product is being shaped by the interaction. It's something that the client is an active part of in co-creating. And that's the principle of clientization. And I'm going to pass on to Maddie to explain a little bit more about what clientization is.
Thank you for that, Nicola. So Nicola really kind of taken us through these different layers of consumer, customer, client. And now we have a great picture of understanding what those different types of relationships look like and what it takes from a technical perspective in terms of automating those engagements. The key picture here is that with client level relationships, it's really about understanding why the person engages with the business, what they value, their needs, and how their needs are likely to evolve over time. What this client level is about, understanding who that individual is on such a deep level, so that you can guide and act as an advisor through trust and insights. And what you deliver, your engagement, your service, it becomes about tailoring it to the individual. It's not necessarily just about service availability. And kind of very common example of a client level relationships, which I'm sure we're all familiar here. We're all the client of someone, or we've all got clients. But a common one is like a private wealth manager, for example. For the most part, the private wealth manager has clients or a couple of clients, and at the bare minimum, they have to know their name, where they come from, their background, and a bit about who this person is. That's the bare minimum for having a good relationship. And then they take that a step further and understand who that individual is on such a deep level when it comes to their finances, of understanding their risk appetite, their life stage. Are they approaching retirement? Are they starting a business? Are they looking to save? Are they looking to invest? What are they looking for? And what are their personal values? Do they value growth? Do they have family? Do they want security? It's this deep understanding about an individual and what they need and what they value, and then being able to tailor your service to them. But what's also important is that because you know who this person is as an individual beyond just their financial needs, you also know how they like to be engaged. Are they quite casual? Can you just pick up the phone and call them, or do they prefer a more formal approach? Are they, kind of hands off, like, I trust you to run with whatever you're doing as a private wealth manager, or do they want to be handheld and guided through everything? An important part is knowing the individual and then tailoring not only your service, but also how you engage with the person. That's basic principles of how we engage with people. And what's important about these client level relationships is that there's a lot of value for both parties. If we look at the business value, when you are a private wealth manager and you recommend a product or service, it's viewed as advice. It's not just viewed as a sale. There's exceptional loyalty in this client space. When you have a good relationship with your private wealth manager, people are less likely to leave. There's no churn once that trust is established. You have a high lifetime value. One of the most important things that comes out of client relationships is by word of mouth referrals, and just being able to share how your service are getting recommended through those referrals. I was chatting to someone the other day who ran a business as a travel agent, and he was saying the only way he ever got clients was through word of mouth referrals. So there's a lot of value extracted here for a business in having these client level relationships. Now, the key question then is, if there is so much value in having a client level relationship and treating people at such a unique, tailored individual level, how can an enterprise do this for millions of people at scale, and most importantly, digitally? It's important to note that when we look at this example of a private wealth manager and the client relationship, it's usually person to person, one manager with about 40 clients. You have to keep track of 40 people. But when you are an enterprise bank or an enterprise telco, you can't keep track of a million people at an individual level. And you have to do it digitally through an app and interface. So the question then is, how do you take your customers to that client level at scale? And that is where the process of clientization comes in, which is what we're talking about here today. So clientization can essentially be described as this transformation of customer level interactions where you only know the person's name and what products they have, and take them to that client level collaboration and guidance, all done digitally. What are the key elements of being able to engage with millions of people at a client level? As I've mentioned before, when looking at the private wealth manager, it's about a deep understanding of the individual. And that means going beyond just the age, name. I have a strong dislike for this approach to personalization and customer engagement, where we see those messages like hello name, hello first name. And the reason I'm so aware that it's not actually personalization and it's not actually knowing the individual is because I signed up for a rewards program a while back and I accidentally put my name in wrong. So now anytime I get some communication, it's spelt wrong. And I'm like, you don't know who I am. You don't know my name. I'm just stored in a database or a CRM. So then if you have to know more about the individual beyond their name, how can an organization do that at scale? And that's where understanding behavior comes in. We talk a lot about understanding financial behavior. We talk about module spend personality, which allows enterprises, banks to gain a behavioral understanding of their customer base. We also talk about understanding digital behavior. Another one of our modules is interaction personality, which enables enterprises to track digital behavior and learn how users navigate, respond, or engage with digital interfaces like an app or a website. Different people engage differently. That's what makes us individuals. When I log onto my banking app, I tend to just click around and explore. Someone else, if they want to complete a task, they complete that task in the 3 steps that it takes. They're not looking for distractions and they're not looking to browse around. Those are different behaviors and different approaches that an individual takes. And when you as an enterprise can understand these individual behaviors, you then essentially know what to offer, when to offer, and when to engage, how to communicate it. And we have spoken about this before, where we look at, once you understand the behavior of an individual through these modules that we look at, like spend personality and interaction personality, you can then match the right product, the right timing, tone, and channel. And that's really what it means to tailor something to an individual. When Madison logs on, what products does she actually need or want? And is this the right time to make a recommendation? And how can we do it in a way that communicates best to her? That's understanding who I am and then engaging with me in a way that feels like I'm a client, not necessarily just a customer, and you are selling a generic product. And the only extent of personalization to this communication is hello, name, spelled wrong. So while we've looked at the approach of a behavioral approach to clientization, it really does sit at the heart of how you can take customer engagement to a client level relationship. What I want to point out is that there's a really important reframing and internal positioning or repositioning that must happen within an enterprise. And that is essentially switching from being product or supply side centric to being entirely customer led or customer centric. And what that means is, as a business, you stop asking, like, we have products, what can we sell? What journey can we create? How can we engage? When can we engage? And instead saying, what does the customer actually need, or what do they actually want? When do they want us to engage, and how do they want us to engage? These are the kind of reframing questions that an organization needs to ask in order to deliver client level engagements. And through this behavioral approach, that's where you can achieve true customer centricity driven by individual needs about the person, the customer, and not just supply side priorities. So with that said, I'm going to hand back to Nicola, and she's going to take us through a conversational approach to engagement and how that journey can facilitate clientization.
Yeah, so I think you can see the kind of conversational approach as like a practical application of clientization. So there are many different ways to get to that client level relationship. One of the ways we've identified is through automated conversations. So I just want to kind of delve into why exactly it's been identified that conversation is something that people want in the first place. But interestingly, the starting point for all of this was actually COVID. And businesses saw a massive uptake in their digital traffic during COVID because that's where people were limited to, but people were also trying to engage with businesses' chatbots more. And that's where kind of the glaring flaws in chatbots came to light, because call centers would get inundated with all the things that chatbot couldn't address. One example is that in the insurance sector, they reported about 200% increase in virtual agent traffic. And the public and government sectors also saw an increase of about 300%. So digital engagement and how effectively it could be automated became the impediment for some and the defining moment for other businesses. The kind of swift adoption of ChatGPT, the fact that it reached like 1 million users in just 5 days, showed that there was a ripe market for conversational engagement. People wanted to have conversations with their digital interfaces. And OpenAI released the first generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT, with a chat front end, and now commonly known as ChatGPT. And it got adopted almost immediately. And since then, user habits or search habits have changed. The query length, even in Google searches, has increased. Google responded by introducing Google's AI mode so that it could facilitate this more conversational engagement that users were already showing. And I've also observed myself when I put a search into Google, I rarely do it in such a restricted manner anymore. I kind of do it so that I know that I'll get an AI response, because I want the AI response, because I know it's easier for me to understand and digest. I don't have to go through the effort of choosing a specific source. It gives me a selection to fact check. And I think that speaks to the fact that conversation is a natural thing to humans. And because of that, it reduces the cognitive load required in engagement. So for businesses to adopt this is essential, because people are looking for shortcuts and easy ways out all the time. Let's talk a bit more about what a conversation actually is and what makes a conversation good. So at the most basic level, a conversation is an exchange of information, and it's usually new information. So you're exchanging new ideas, opinions, or emotions. Usually, when two humans come into conversation with each other, there's a reason for why they're having a conversation. So they are contextualized. This could be a kind of practical reason. You want to get to a certain answer or solution, or it could be an open-ended social reason, and you're just looking to engage. But implicitly, each human kind of knows what the context is for that conversation, and they adjust their responses accordingly, because they can see that the conversation is heading in a certain direction. They don't want to derail it. If humans weren't aware of context or the underlying meaning or intent, the conversation would just constantly be derailed, and we'd just be throwing our thoughts at each other and not having a conversation at all. So that leads into my next point, which is that conversations are reciprocal. Two participants in a conversation are each participating equally. They feel like equals, and it's not a monologue with one person sharing all their thoughts and the other one just listening. The fourth point is that it is emergent, which means that they unfold in real time. No one knows what the script is going into a conversation. You're not just spewing out something that's predefined. You are adjusting what you are saying to the other person based on what they've just said. You might be following some kind of social norms, social script, but it's not actually fixed. And that kind of leads conversations to go places that you wouldn't have anticipated and reveals novel, unexpected information. Now we'll go into how, when you apply these conversationals to a front end, what benefits you can see. Maddie, can you go to the next one? Perfect. The first is that the exchange of new information means that you're going to gain new data for knowing your customer. So when customers engage with you in a conversational manner, it invites disclosure, which means that they're going to reveal things to you that they wouldn't have revealed in a fixed template or fixed questionnaire or survey. This new information could include certain behavioral traits or lines of reasoning or decision making. So in essence, a conversational interface becomes a goldmine for new data about your customer. And you can then use that data to develop a rich segment of one persona for your customer, which you can use to perfect future conversations or to inform other interactions on different channels. Ecogentic, which is our AI agent builder, tracks and records everything that happens in a conversation. So it will track recommendations that were made, the responses to those recommendations, whether the person broke out of the conversation to speak to a human agent, what happened just before that, the content of the messages that were sent, and received and general session tracking. And that becomes really useful to inform other interactions with your customer. And then next, customer and conversational interactions let the customer set the context. The context is preset by the interface because of the way that it's laid out, because of the functionalities that are available to the customer. But a conversation, it's like open-ended nature, kind of lets the customer lead it into a certain direction. There is an art to having a system that allows conversations to reroute to another context if they need to, but also understanding when they should be confined to certain parameters. So, for example, if a customer is communicating with conversational interface in order to like make a transaction, if they ask about the weather, the agent should be able to detect that the weather has nothing to do with bank transactions, which means it needs to be connected to an LLM that has that knowledge. And it should also be able to devise a way to get the conversation back on track. That means that you need to have certain triggers in place to dictate when the agent reroutes. So I'm just going to give a practical example of how that unfolds in Ecogentic. Ecogentic is a directed graph, which means it dictates the sequence of events in a specific direction. So the graph is made up of various nodes, and each node has a specific function that it serves. So you can have a message node that contains message text, or condition node that dictates what the agent should do if certain conditions are met or not met. Recommender node contain the offers that you're recommending, and they can route to specific places depending on the results of the recommendations. There's a whole bunch of different nodes. There's breakout nodes, so you can go to a human agent if you need to. API nodes that allow you to make generic API calls to fetch data when you need it. And most importantly, the chat node, which is connected to an LLM. And that's where all the magical generative stuff happens, and also where a lot of the intent detection happens. And you can configure different triggers at each node. When a customer says a certain word, it means that it will get rerouted to a node you've configured. This links to my point of reciprocity too, because the interaction becomes a kind of collaboration, and there's equal energy and effort coming from both parties, and they're both trying to pursue a common goal. So these interactions facilitate a level of personal investment. If I've gone through the effort of trying to get this agent to do something for me, and it's been working with me to get there, I'm not going to log out suddenly and have to start again. It keeps people coming back if they are able to complete the task successfully, and that's very important. So it feels collaborative. The emergent quality of conversations speaks to the dynamic real-time aspect of it. So by not having a conversational journey like predefined, your agent can also recognize opportunities that it would have otherwise missed. So for example, if a customer wants to transfer funds from one account to another account, but they kind of seem unsure about which account to transfer to, your agent could recommend a high interest savings account. And that never would have happened with a predefined journey. It only happens when you have this dynamism and real-time quality. So yeah, I'm going to pass back to Maddie, who's going to talk about how conversations can support clientization.
Thank you, Nicola. I was thinking about when you were laying out what goes into a conversation, and you were saying it's unscripted. For the most part, all conversations are unscripted, but I feel like we have these autopilot scripts in our head. And I hate when someone goes off script. And I was thinking about it a couple of days ago. I was like, oh, hey, how are you? And someone was like, oh, I'm bad. And I went, oh, that's good. I was like, I have the script set out. You have to say, oh, I'm good, thanks. So yeah, anyways, but the point is, don't be on autopilot. Focus on don't rely on your backup script. But now looking at how a conversational approach facilitates clients, Nicola's taken us through what goes into a conversation and what it takes to have a successful conversation. And now we want to see how exactly this facilitates clientization. As I mentioned earlier, clientization is essentially the process of transforming customer level interactions, your hello names, your generic product recommendations into client level collaboration. And you have to be able to do this at scale and digitally. And what's most important about this is being able to understand the individual and know them on a deep level, which means knowing their behavior. But the most crucial part is you have to ask, what does the customer want, not what we want to sell. And Nicola highlighted perfectly why this conversational approach helps achieve that client level relationship, because she said conversational interactions let the customer set the context. And this means that they lead the interaction, and the bank or the enterprise system essentially facilitates them to getting to where they want to be. And if you think about it, this is the reverse of what current user journeys are or current app interfaces are with our bank, which is if I want to make a transaction or pay someone or transfer funds, I log in, I'm constrained by this predefined journey that the bank has already set out. I have to click bank, payments, enter amount. Like, it's all set based on this predefined journey. It's not led by me. Whereas that conversational approach is the exact opposite. And the best example that I can think of for why this customer-led approach, where the customer sets the context and you essentially have this blank canvas, is this example that Nicola shared with the team ages ago about when she was doing research for some writing, and she was reading into Apple and the iPhone and why it was so successful when it was introduced compared to other phones at the time. I don't want to speak badly of other brands, but like Nokia. And what it essentially came down to is that what Apple did really well is they decided, let the phone be a blank canvas that lets the user take control. Because at the time, I never had a Nokia. I'm sure a couple of people in this call did have a Nokia, but it had a keyboard in the way. It wasn't touchscreen. So you were kind of set by what you could have on the phone if there were like predefined apps. And if you wanted to introduce a new app, or app developers wanted to introduce something, they were constrained by this predefined layout. And Apple flipped that entirely by saying, let's have a blank canvas. Let's have a space where the user can configure it and customize it, and people developing apps can have freedom to develop them the way they want. And what was important is that they did not force the customer to adapt to their system, or consumers at the time really wanted to prioritize choice as usability. That came down to the individual. And iPhone did exactly that. It was entirely customizable to the user, and it really flipped everything on its head. And we can see why this was so successful. I mean, Apple is an incredibly successful company. Lots of people have iPhones. But beyond that, when we look at client level relationships, but I feel like we all have some weird relationship to our phones. Like, my phone is my phone. I understand exactly how it works. I know where my settings button is and when to click and everything. So when my friend will say, oh, can you just do something on my phone? I'm very aware that, oh, this is not how I like it. I don't know where anything is. I have to search for something, like I'm not used to it. But we have these close bonds to our cell phones. So if you then had to extend that and say, looking at the client level view, a private wealth manager does essentially have an entirely, I don't want to say customizable relationship with their clients, but each one is unique and individual to a specific person. And that's just an extension of how we operate as people and engage with different people. You engage differently with your mom as you would engage with your friend. And the same is the way professionals treat their clients as individuals. So with that example and that approach, and how a conversational approach lets the customer lead and set the tone for how they want to move, it really helps facilitate that one-to-one relationship that a bank is trying to achieve with their customers. And because it's done through a digital interface, I don't want to say a chat box that can work on an app or a website, it can be done at scale and across millions of people. And it helps achieve clientization. So I always like to end any point when we're talking about why you should implement an approach or how it can achieve something, is you kind of have to look at the value of it. The so what, like, oh, this approach is so great. Well, why should I rush to introduce it? And first of all, looking at the value for the customer. If I'm setting the context and creating something that is entirely unique to me and it works for me, number one, I'm in full control. I feel understood as an individual. I can engage on my own terms. There's nothing better than being able to do things on your own terms and not be constrained by everything else around you. And what helps when you engage as a customer over time with a service provider is you build that trust over time, and you are loyal. You like your brand, you like the service that you are provided with. And for a business, the values are pretty obvious. Nicola mentioned the opportunity. If a customer logs on and types in, like, let's make a payment, or let's do something here, you can then make a product recommendation. Here's a savings account or an investment account. So there's higher upsell and cross-sell opportunities, specifically because the recommendation or the offer, it's not necessarily like pushed as like hey, I'll buy this now. It's more seen as guided, we're guiding you somewhere. With that, there's also stronger loyalty and reduced churn, a higher LTV, and a sustainable competitive advantage, an excellent customer service or customer engagement approach is so important in terms of maintaining and driving stronger loyalty is because there's so many services around us and there's so many service providers, and it's becoming so much easier to jump and change between service providers, whether it's, your network provider jumping from, one data package to the next, or whether it's a banking service saying which bank offers the lowest account fees or no transaction fees. It's very easy and cheaper to change. So as services all become fairly similar, what gives enterprises that competitive advantage? And it comes down to how you treat your customers. Are they happy and loyal? So to round off my part, before I hand back over to Nicola, I essentially want to say that at the heart of clientization, this process of taking your customers and treating them as clients is a simple principle. It has to be customer-led. You've got to understand them deeply, and you need to respond with guidance and advice and be a trusted advisor, something we talk about often. And when you can do this at scale for millions of customers digitally through a conversational engagement, you essentially turn every interaction into a one-to-one client-level relationship across millions. I'm going to hand over to Nicola, and she's going to show us that this isn't just theory, it's actually all happening.
Yeah, I recently joined Discovery. I joined first through medical aid, then they got me into Vitality, then they got me into Discovery Bank very cleverly. Apparently, I'm quite a malleable person. But their chatbot on their website is quite a saving grace, because their website is the most confusing place. It's almost like they make it impossible for you to claim things and get vouchers. It must be strategic, but their agent is really useful in trying to guide you to different places and tell you exactly where you need to be. And they've also now introduced Discovery AI in their banking service. So they have a WhatsApp integration, and you can communicate with the AI through natural language and voice. You can send images to it and ask them questions. So you can ask it, how much did I spend on fuel this month, or am I on track with my budget? And it delivers personalized insights and analytics. So it tracks your spending and shows you what you're spending more on versus less. It can retrieve documents, so fetch bank statements and tax certificates. And it's got the kind of security and authentication process. So all the sessions are secured through an authentication process. And then it also has breakout loops to humans when you need them. So it's got all the great functionalities. At the same time, it doesn't really feel like the agent knows me. It sounds the same every time. It doesn't sense that I'm feeling frustrated. It doesn't sense I'm feeling confused and can't adjust. Or if I'm in an explorative mood, asking a question about several different things, it will get confused and focus on one thing specifically, or it will be oh no, please, and starts freaking out. And I feel like one that has more behavioral intelligence would be able to sense that I am looking to be recommended to. I'm looking for guidance. I'm looking for that kind of private banker interaction. And it's funny because they do actually advertise Discovery AI as the always on virtual private banker in your pocket, but it doesn't really feel like that. And we all know that chatbots struggle with memory. So if I end a session and then come in again, I will need to give it a whole bunch of information all over again. It's not like I can just pick up from where we left off. Ecogentic is kind of the solution to all of that. It adds layers of behavioral intelligence and makes the interaction feel so much more natural and hyper-personalized. And because it's fully configurable, you can tailor it to exactly how you know your customers might want to interact.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm going to stop presenting now and see if there's any questions in the chat. Anyone have any comments?
Can I just make a key point for clarity in that we're not talking about Discover credit card, or Nicola's, I don't think talk about that. And she's not talking about Discovery. She's talking about a company that in a certain region of the world basically provides health benefit services and additional capabilities. So that's what it is, just for those who are going to be confused about this is Discovery as in a TV channel.
We have a multinational audience. Got to give context.
Any questions from anyone?
I thought that was very clear, and I don't have any questions or comments necessary. I thought that was a great presentation.
Thanks, Jess.
I think in a follow-up, you can demonstrate what you spoke about in a configuration the ecosystem recommended. 3 recommenders, one that is consumption-based, one that's customer-based, one that's client-based. And then show how they all behave differently